Hey everybody, thank you so much for coming. Yeah, grab some food, grab some drinks. We're gonna do our normal little intro thing and then we'll get rolling over here. Hopefully in the right place. This is Code Youngstown. Thank you so much for coming out. Most of you are familiar faces, so awesome to come back and support our group and all that. If you're new, this is Code Youngstown. We basically operate as a sort of a software user group for all different languages, for design systems, for project management, for all that kind of stuff. We just try to wrangle everybody together, software developers, coders, hackers, all that kind of stuff into one room. We give technical talks a few times a year. We do socials a few times a year, mixers, just networking events. We try to highlight a bunch of different places in the city that haven't gone fully remote yet. There's not that many left, so we're gonna keep looking. But Westside Bowl is sort of our home base, and they support us, and thankfully they let us pretty much book whenever we want to. If you haven't been here, Westside Bowl, they do shows, they do concerts. It's sort of a community hub, so definitely check out all the flyers everywhere. There's shows every weekend, all kinds of stuff going on. They have the place booked, I think, Saturday, like 700 people coming for a concert, so it'll be crazy. So definitely check that stuff out. We're mostly on Slack. We have a huge Slack group now. There's like 400 people in our local Slack group, which is awesome. Find Slack on codeyoungstown.com. We have LinkedIn, we have Twitter, we have all that kind of stuff, so there's a lot of different ways to stay connected. So definitely follow us if you want to get updates on new events, all that kind of stuff. If you're interested in planning, Joe and I mostly do the running of this thing. If you have an event that you want to put on, if you have some kind of idea that you would like to move this group into that direction, if you want to host us, any of that kind of stuff, let us know. There's different people that have been in and out that run the podcast, or they help us do video, or they help us do this, or give talks. If you have any kind of idea, if you have constructive criticism, anything, drop us a message, Joe or I on Slack, email us, doesn't matter, let us know. We'd love to help you make that happen however we can. What else we got? I think that's mostly it. CodeYoungstown.com. Find us on Slack. If you're at least not in Slack, that's the best place. We're just hanging out in there, letting people know what we're working on, tossing stuff about local events, local stuff. People are talking about code. It's a great place for local support if you're a hacker. So join us in there. And then yeah, you want to?
Sure. Introduction here. He knows more about you than I do.
Cool. So I would like to welcome Keith Kurak, who is a developer success engineer at Expo. Thank you so much for coming, Keith. I really appreciate it. Keith and I met actually by happenstance. I reached out to Expo support and was like, hey, we need some help at Dev Youngstown, and Keith happened to be Cleveland based, and we struck up a conversation. So thank you for being willing and volunteering to come down on a Thursday night and tell us a little bit about React Native and Expo.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Everybody give Keith a hand.
It was kind of fun getting, it just happened to be my rotation on the support line, and I see Youngstown in the email domain. I'm like, Expo is in Palo Alto. I'm definitely the only employee in Ohio, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like driving distance from me. And I'm Googling, I'm like, this guy runs meetups. I like to speak at meetups. This is awesome. So I'm so happy to be here. And speaking of speaking at meetups, like I need to do the geeky thing and take like one of the talk selfies, because this is by far the coolest venue I've done a talk at. So if you need to get out of the way, that's fine, but I need to take a talk selfie here.
More than 5 people, you're good now.
Yes, yeah, we were joking about it. I had a snafu, I think a communication error at a conference, and all the rooms were packed except mine. I think people didn't know I was talking, or they were deeply offended by what I was going to talk about. So hopefully you guys are not deeply offended by what I'm going to talk about, which is React Native and Expo. So we're going to modify this audience participation. I'm going to say, number one, don't worry about the QR code. It just goes to Expo on your app store. If you have a reliable cellular connection down here, against all odds still, feel free to download the Expo app from your respective app store. And you can try this audience participation element in a little while. If you don't, I have various devices, because I'm a mobile developer, I collect things, and I will try to distribute a few that have been pre-configured to work with it. So we're gonna make a go of it, but you can join in the fun on a reliable cellular connection. So a couple terms we're gonna throw around a lot tonight. You're gonna hear React Native, you're gonna hear Expo, it's kind of a technology that not everything falls under like this neat little name. Like React Native itself, when you talk about that, that's actually like a framework for writing native mobile apps in React. How many are familiar with React around here? Seems pretty familiar, cool. And when you look at like what say like the core React Native team does, it's actually like I don't want to minimize what they're doing, it's extremely important, but it's a small part of the whole ecosystem that it takes to actually build a mobile app, a cross-platform mobile app in JavaScript. So Expo comes in and we provide open source tools and services. We provide the Expo CLI, which is a nice entry point to start developing your app. We provide online build services so you can build your app without having a Mac, especially iOS apps. So we put all these things around React Native to kind of bring mobile development as close as possible to web development. We think of all the great things about web development. You can write JavaScript. Everybody has a JavaScript interpreter on their computer because they have a browser. You can deploy a web app by copying files to a server and then it serves. So that's like the true north we're going after at Expo, because that makes mobile development, which is historically kind of like, it has barriers, it's inaccessible. You have to deal with these kind of like pseudo monopolies, of these app stores, there's just barriers that are there that aren't there with with web apps. So we're trying to break those down as much as we can. As I said, I'm a dev success engineer at Expo. Before that, I was a longtime Expo user. Built a health engagement app, rebuilt it in Expo tools. And then I was like, oh, hey, I like talking to people about this, so here I am. So my question for everyone today, who is a mobile developer? See, 1, 2, okay. Who has done like a cross-platform framework, like a React Native or a Flutter or something like that? That's a lot of mobile developers already. Who has done like native iOS or Android development? All right, nice. All right, you guys all look like my age or younger, but this might be true. Has anyone done like Windows Mobile?
What's that?
I mean, that sounds crazy, but I've done a lot of Windows Mobile. And I mean, like, so I'm from Cleveland, we have a lot of, we're all on like the turnpike kind of, so there's like warehouses and stuff like that, and like these scanning devices, those are all, I think not anymore, they're finally Android devices, but those Windows Mobile lasted on those things for at least a decade after Windows Mobile was dead. So I spent like 5 or 7 years. I think I spent as much time doing Windows Mobile development as I've done React Native development. Who has made a program on their graphing calculator in study hall in high school? Yes.
Yeah, I did.
Who is a web developer? Who has made a website work on a small screen? Mobile developer. Mobile developer. If you make an app work on a small screen, you're a mobile developer. All right, who has not raised their hand yet? I guess I was gonna go to like server APIs. If you've made an API that interacts with a mobile app, I would consider you a mobile developer. Everybody's a mobile developer. The whole world does computing on small screens. If you interact with computing on small screens, you are a mobile developer. Oh, yeah, that was the conclusion I was gonna get to. So then it's all about like, how do we make apps? I want to get to the point where you might choose something like React Native, and a lot of you have been exposed to React, so you might already be familiar with a lot of the value proposition, but humor me anyway. So regardless of how we're coming into the mobile app ecosystem, this need to have a mobile app, there's a need to have a mobile app, kind of self-explanatory. So once you get to that point, you're like, okay, I need an app. And this is usually the app that level that like business folks operate. They're like, I need an app. And they don't think about like the differences between all the platforms. Like, where does this app go? Does it go on iOS, Android? Does it go to the web? Does it go to the graphing calculator? Does it go to Windows Mobile? Hopefully not. So this decision needs to be made. And so when someone's talking about making an app, at a minimum, they're talking about making 3 apps, at least in their ideal world. They're talking about making an iOS, an Android, and a web app. So that's the point where things get really complex. And you could choose different strategies. You could be like, well, hey, maybe let's target one of these first. Let's do an iOS only app. And now you're excluding half of the market. And if you're international, excluding 80% of the market if you go iOS first. You could do a web app first, and you've got the whole market now, but you've got way less exposure on everybody's home screen. So this is the point where you're either like, we're a big company, we have the bandwidth to make 3 different apps, or we're gonna start to look for efficiencies. So this is where we have cross-platform frameworks. Let's pretend they're not as versatile as they are now and go back a few years ago and think about, okay, there's frameworks that try to make an app for iOS and Android at the same time. So now in this calculus, if you want to try to target all of them, but you have really limited resources, maybe you've reduced it to 2 apps. Or maybe you've gotten to the point where like, oh, I could do mobile first and I could do web later, because at least like everybody basically has either an iOS or an Android phone. So this is the point where you might hear about React Native, because you're like, I need something that lets me write this once and build it everywhere. And I'm gonna Google cross-platform mobile frameworks. I'm gonna find things. I'm gonna find Ionic, Flutter, Native Script, if 5 years ago or something, React Native. And I'm not here to talk about the other ones, but I can talk about React Native. So maybe you're like, that sounds really interesting. I've learned React before. This is the point where you might ask yourself, what is React Native? And the answer is, it's React and it's native. Of course, why would you ask that? So first of all, it's React. We already know a lot of folks have familiarity with React in the audience, and React is the whole idea is that you make components in JavaScript, and they return what your user interface should be, and they are a function of properties, things that come from the outside, and state, things that come from the inside. So this is a really simple example where it is rendering a loading screen, it's kicking off a request for some data, and when the data arrives, it returns the data in a scroll view. So, the distinctive of React is that you don't have to think about your in-between states. You only have to think about, like, what does this thing look like when it's loading? What does this thing look like when it's rendering data? So, and when it comes to React Native, and you might kind of already start to notice here, the tags, the controls in here, they look a little different than your React. You don't see div and spans, you see scroll views, text views, things like that, which are proxies for real native components. So unlike, say, an Ionic or a PhoneGap, you're not using JavaScript to make a cross-platform app by putting a web view inside of an app and rendering HTML. You are using the real native primitives of the operating system itself. So those React Native views, text inputs, buttons, section lists, all these different things, they map to native code in Objective-C or Swift or Java or Kotlin or whatever, that are things that you would use directly if you were building that app in those languages in Xcode or Android Studio. So View becomes a UI view on iOS, View becomes a view on Android, I guess it's just called a view. Or like the infinitely scrolly thing that becomes a UI table view on iOS. And it becomes a recycler view, and there's probably newer ones too. I'm just out of date on my Android terminology. And it communicates over this bridge. So there's a portal between your JavaScript, which is your business logic, and this native land. And it's actually asynchronous, but it's like really well optimized asynchronous. Like I haven't had like a sequencing issue, I think in like 7 years. I think I had one my first year I was coding React Native, and then it got fixed. So, and in fact, that's all kind of going away. You might hear something about it's called like the new architecture, and it's going to replace it with fully synchronous like C++ stuff going between JavaScript and native, and it's going to get really cool someday. It's already really cool though. So, conclusion, you might do that investigation, find out what React Native is, and you're going to find that, hopefully, we hope, it's a good combination of skills you might already have, like JavaScript, the lingua franca of the internet, React, a web framework that already just has a ton of traction, as we just saw here, how many folks have touched React. It's going to have the good combination of stuff you need, It's going to have a real native user experience. It's going to have a robust ecosystem of components that let you plug into that native functionality built into the operating systems. And the cherry on top, which we'll get to a little more, is it also can target web. And it actually does this through a library called React Native Web. And it's actually really simple how it works at the most basic level. There's tons of optimizations, but fundamentally what it's doing, it takes that view, it takes that text input, it turns them back into like divs and inputs. So it actually goes back and it's literally like a substitution at the transpiler layer.
Hey Keith, are your slides coming through on that front one? Okay. I think we're getting that pop-in issue you're talking about.
Yeah, if anybody sees something that looks like a blank screen, let me know.
I'll put my hand up for you.
Jiggle the handle on my. I looked this up too. I swear I'm the only person in the world where Google Slides does this too. That's the most frustrating thing is when you look up what should be a really obvious technical issue on Google and you find out that you're the only one. So if anybody runs into that, let me know so at least we can both commiserate together. So this gets us back to now that we are talking about, okay, we've turned our platform problem, or where do we put our app? We've turned it from 3 entities back into 1. We are now working with a more concrete definition of oh, you want an app business person who has money? Here is an app. And all I had to think about is this is an app and not this is all these different platforms. So this gets us back to our React Native and Expo and how they can help you out. And I'm gonna cut to the chase and, is that one working? Oh, good.
I'll give you a signal if that's not.
The easiest way to get started with this is npx create Expo app. And I'm gonna show you a special template of that today, the template tabs. This is an extra line that actually opts you into something that's even more well situated for what we were trying to do. npx create Expo app would get you a nice blank thing on its own that would work well on iOS and Android. This template tabs opts you into something called Expo router, which is much more optimized for a great web experience. So you can run this command, you'll get a starter project, and you can run npx expo start, and it will run on your computer. So this is where I will goose our audience participation here, and we're gonna try to see how many people can run my project from my computer. So I'm gonna hand out some of my phones here. Nobody, answer any texts for me. So let me go to my other screen here. There we go. I will kind of demonstrate this out front so you can see what I'm doing here. Actually, let me restart the command here. So I have a project that I kicked off with this template. I did some things to it. It was actually a comedy of errors how I got to the final project I got at. So it actually works poorly, but it works poorly in all these ways that I can't wait to describe to you. So, so I'm gonna run npx expo start here. Pretend I already ran the create command. And it just dropped a node looking thing over here. You might be, you'd be like, oh, it's got package JSON, it's got a lock file of some kind of Apache package manager, it's got some TypeScript configuration, it's got a bunch of folders with TypeScript in them. So don't worry about everything over there. You can engage with it at that level for now and you'll be totally fine. If you were doing this and this was like a web app, you would probably, if you were doing local development, you would start a local development server. You would basically spin something up that would take your JavaScript and serve it over localhost so you could open it in your web browser, right? npx expo start's doing basically the same thing, and in fact, because we're using that nice, very friendly to web template, I can hit the W button here and it will actually open it in a web browser. And I'm going to immediately put the dev tools on here and shrink the window because I did not optimize it for a big screen. And I don't want to embarrass myself with that code there. And it's building, it's almost done. You see a little building guy there. Yay, it works. So that gets it for web. That's a very familiar process for anybody who's worked on React locally, but let's get it on our device too. So we're going to open this app on our phone without having built anything on our phones. If you happen to have been lucky enough to get cellular working and you got the Expo Go app installed, you can actually scan this QR code and it will either crash my computer or it'll run my app. And for demonstration purposes, I will do this to myself. We're trying to spare the Wi-Fi a little bit, so.
There we go, we got it, okay.
So yeah, you can see, it went kind of quick there, but you can see I scanned the QR code. The app is now running on my phone. Which table needs a phone? I would give my phone. You guys want one? Sure. All right. If my wife texts, just tell her I'm on my way. Who else needs a device?
I've got two more.
Does anybody want an extra iPad? Play with Alright, we got it working on a.
What is it supposed to look like? Let's do
That's it right there. Apologies for the yellow box here. Anybody want extra device? Okay. Here, I'll throw one here just in case.
The one unfortunate thing is one of those devices contained my notes for what I was going to tell you about the demo while I was on the screen, but I think I can remember. So, what sorcery is this? This Expo Go app. So it's kind of like a web browser for native apps. What Expo Go does is it has kind of like this kitchen sink of native APIs in there. You might remember going back a few screens ago that screen that showed us, hey, you got JavaScript, you got native components. So like, if you don't have the code that runs those native components, your phone can download all the JavaScript it wants for React Native. It's not going to do anything with it. So what's happening is the Expo Go app has a preset, kind of like a friendly, just amount of things that would usually help you get like at least a basic like app that would like make an API calls and it would display stuff. It would let you enter data. It wouldn't have anything. It can't, by like Apple and Google's policies, have things that like require special permissions. Like it's not going to have HealthKit integration because you literally have to fill out like a giant form and say you're not going to steal Google's health, and we're not going to be able to get that through the App Store while saying, oh yeah, we can run just random JavaScript from the internet. So that's what the Expo Go app is. So what it does is it lets you get started with mobile development, real mobile components, without actually building anything to your phone. The way to do this without something like Expo Go is you have to plug this phone in, hit a bunch of dialogues, install Xcode, wait 15 minutes for it to build an Xcode, all these things, and then when you unplug it, it doesn't work again. You might have to restart the whole process.
Is that tunneling through Expo's services to your computer?
So the reason why it's working on your cell phone, so normally if you were working in your local Wi-Fi, you would just leave it all on local network and it would go really fast. It's gonna go a little bit slower because we have an option. I just realized I didn't start it with the right option, did I? How many people, is everybody running okay for everybody?
It's running for me, yeah.
Okay, is anybody not running it? Is it? Okay, I just realized I did not turn on the tunnel when I was done. So the way you're supposed to run it, this is what happens when you live code. I was supposed to run it npx expo start. What do you guys think? Should we try to restart it and get everybody on the tunnel? We can try it. Because I think actually the phones I gave you guys weren't running, like they didn't reload it. All right, let's do that real quick. So, normally it would be on localhost, but if I run npx expo start -- tunnel, it's going to start ngrok. So ngrok being the thing that can like pipe local hosted stuff over the internet. It looks like some folks are already loading it. So yeah, if you scan this barcode, you can get it over the tunnel. So I'll leave that up for a moment. Thank you for notifying me of that oversight. Yes!
So
Why is the tunnel important? Because you're actually, if you can't access it over the network directly, like through the
Right.
network, you can actually get it like over the
Yeah, so I put all my devices on Wi-Fi, like
Got it.
right after we talked about how maybe we shouldn't stick everybody on the Wi-Fi tonight, but I left the rest on cellular, and because the tunnel is an HTTPS, public internet address, anybody can stream my app over the internet. It's not the greatest speed, of course, because that's a really long round trip for the trick that this can do, which is live reloading as you change your code. So every time I save a file, as I would go developing this would actually live reload. You can imagine that can be really expensive over the internet. So it's good in a pinch. I still use it sometimes when I go to like this one coffee shop where they like have like a really great dirty chai and some really good bakery, but they have a really weird Wi-Fi network. I mean, man, I'm just like, the loss in productivity is worth it for the good dirty chai. So everybody's got to make that judgment in their own mind, like what kind of coffee could persuade them to work over the tunnel for long periods of time. But everybody's got their tolerances. So now that we got running a little bit, let me explain my app real quick because maybe you guys can help. Oh, you guys have already done it. I am so grateful you've done this. So what this app is doing, it's a very simple Expo router app, and it's listing some categories of art, and it's querying the Cleveland Museum of Art API. They have actually a pretty nice public API. Well, I should say it was nice on the first day, and then I built the app, and then it was really slow. But what's really weird is actually now it's suddenly really fast and I'm here. So that is super cool. Thank you, Cleveland Museum of Art. So all it would do is it would query the list of art by category. It would filter it for the ones that actually have a public image on the internet. And then if you clicked on the piece of art itself, it would give you the, I guess they call this the tombstone over here. I did not know that until I looked at the API and it said tombstone. That's like the little placard in the art museum that shows up under the work of art. So, hey, art facts for you. So, this is a kind of good opportunity to explain what Expo Router, like how it's constructed right here, how you construct an app in it. So, Expo Router, a couple big things it's trying to do over stock React Native or the base Expo template is it's bringing file-based routing to native apps. Is anybody familiar with Next.js? Cool, yeah, so you guys are familiar with dropping files in folders and having them represent the routes to your app. So we're trying to do that with native apps, or I should say universal apps, because this app also works on web. So you're probably familiar then in that case with there's route groups here. So in this case, this tabs route here, which represents this guy over here. This is not going to show up on my URL because it's got the parentheses, but it's going to group screens together. And this layout file in here is what actually defines why this should be tabs. You'll see it actually returns a tabs component here. So that's what is going on to say these things should be tabs together. And then these other things are folders. Since they don't have the parentheses in here, they represent an actual URL. So in here I have categories, expand that out a little bit here. And then category in a square bracket. This is a variable, so this is a dynamic route. So I can push categories basketry, categories calligraphy, and it'll navigate to the right screen, passing that as a parameter, which I can then pass to the Cleveland Museums of Art's API, with a little variable in there, and that's what actually gives me the art unique to that. And then of course I have one for the individual work of art as well. And besides just not having to need boilerplate for navigation, the other nice thing this does is it gives you deep linking for free. So it used to be in mobile apps, you wouldn't get this URL stuff going on. This URL stuff isn't super important. Here it is actually being bad now. It randomly throws CORS errors on the web, but not all the time. So I don't really know what's going on. And different categories actually are more likely to throw a CORS error. It looks like they all are right now, but basketry was really reliably throwing a CORS error a few days ago. And now it just might be doing it everywhere. So Um, that kind of seems to defeat the purpose of a public API if you're just supposed to use it, but then it throws CORS errors. So I think something's going a little bit wrong there. But anyway, you can see where the URL changes. Like this comes for free with Expo Router. So that's like one of the bigger parts of like web readiness, like is about like, oh, I should be able to compile this thing and it looks just as good on mobile as it does on web and vice versa without me putting extra work in because the controllers just map over. But it also means like it's table stakes for any web app to have this kind of URL structure. You should be able to link to things. And increasingly it's table stakes for mobile apps too, because you all have clicked the link and had it open on mobile apps before. That's deep linking. Really it's barely different than how a web app works. All it's doing is it's sending a URL to an app, and an app recognizes the URL. The only difference is it's going to have an extension or a protocol that the mobile operating system recognizes as belonging to the app. Like mine might have like art app : / instead of HTTP : / and then that would know to open the art app instead of going to the website. So that stuff works the same across both. You can actually do things where like you hand off, you share links between the website and the mobile app. So like there's Apple handoff, and I'm an Android user, so I don't really understand all that, but I know you can have a link that opens, you can literally like send the link from your like desktop web browser to your phone, and then because the app is installed on your phone, it'll open the link in your phone instead. So you can like go seamlessly like, oh, here's some really nice calligraphy on the website, and you can open it on your phone directly from that link. So that is Router in a nutshell. The next part I wanted to show you in this, so this is Expo Router version 3, which just came out like last week, and we added a trick in here, and it's called API routes. So this is actually not just a front end, but it's also a back end, a little bit. It's a back end as much as me, very much a front end developer, can develop quickly. So this is the part where I guess we haven't broken it yet, which is actually really good, but I put lots of fun things in here to keep from breaking it. I made a very simple favorites API. So some of you have already hit the little heart button next to or the clap button, I should say. It actually goes, I'll explain this loading thing in a second, why it does that. So when you click the clap, what it's doing is it's sending a post to basically localhost here. And so there's actually an API behind this. And you can define APIs, backend functions, right next to your user interface with these plus API files. So in here, I have a get, which gets the favorites for the work of art. And then I have a post, which will post the fave or the clap or whatever. And you'll see here, this is not what you should do with your backend. I actually used the library. I was like, I want to make this self-contained because I don't know how the network will go wherever I'm at. So I used node persist, which just writes JSON to a file on my computer. So every time you guys are hitting the clap right now, you're writing a JSON file to my computer. So really easy, honestly, like, that sounds really cheesy, but I'm really bad at backends. Like I'm the guy who's always like, oh, I'm just gonna go with Firebase. Cause it involves spinning up a server or touching a database or putting a droplet on something. People talk about like those hosting services and like it's easy, and I'm just like, that's so hard. Like if it's not like a screen on the device, I just don't get it. I can call APIs all day, but he asked me to write them. This is helping me overcome my fear of APIs, like to be able to experiment with it. Oh, go ahead.
Could you talk a little bit more about like what is the output of this API stuff? Because I've read like Remix is doing this, Next.js is doing this, and a lot of them are contingent on like server component stuff, and also contingent on like TRP or RPC stuff, and it doesn't output like a normal like RESTful like API that anything else can hit. What is?
Okay. So that. Stay tuned for more about that when it comes to native. But in this case, so that would be like server, if we were like doing like say like React Native server components, which people might be thinking about.
Sounds horrifying.
This is regular old RESTful calls. So we actually, when it comes to how you would deploy this, we have instructions on how to do it for like Netlify. I'm blanking out on the other ones. All those names just go like over my head. But basically it's like deploying a regular like Node Express.js application. Because these are just APIs. And I could probably go into my network here, even though my core stuff is misbehaving, it should actually get to my favorites API. So there it did the fetch for the faves for all the favorite artworks. So this will look like a regular get. They'll preview out in JSON. So yeah, this is pretty normal RESTful API stuff.
Would that be serverful or serverless, or can you pick? Sorry to ask you all these.
No. It's actually, I was asking a question related to that, but I didn't know the terms to use when I asked it. And I apologized in advance to the person I was asking it about how it must sound like the last time I spun up an Express.js API wasn't like a glitch instance like 7 years ago, which was true. But I think it's more going to be geared towards like serverless, because we actually very intentionally like respin up the API. Like we run the whole API code each time, so it's not designed to have state on that particular server. So I think it is going to be kind of geared as like a replacement for like a web function kind of thing. I think I'm using the terms right there. Which also like was a little challenge to because before I went to the persistence library, I was like, oh, can I just store stuff in memory? I remember like putting the variables in memory on Glitch 7 years ago. And then I asked why, and he was like, yeah, we don't want side effects in this. I was like, that makes sense. I get it. I mean, it's unfortunate for me, who feels like anytime he makes an API work, it's, it is a side effect, it's an accident. So, where was I going with? Oh, okay, yes. So I've been talking about API routes. I'm trying to see if I hit mentally all my little list of fun little things in here. Whenever I do like a little project like this, I kind of like accidentally happen among like things that are like maybe not specific to Expo or React Native, but I think are just fun things that happen. So talking about my whole like, oh, I just want to make an API with a local data store. I had some issues getting SQLite up and running because we're actually working, this is a very early version of this, and we're working on improving like the compiling so it works with a wider variety of node libraries. And it didn't happen to work with this very specific library that I was using to try to get me over my intimidation of SQLite. So I went to the node persistence here. So when I used this on my own, just testing, I just started clicking the little clap button rapidly, of course. And then I crashed my process several times because I had like open file handles flying everywhere, and it was like, you can't do this to this file, stop that. So I was like, oh, if I turn the whole room on this could be bad. So I need to put some kind of throttling in there. So I started with like low dash throttle, and I was like, oh, that's kind of boring. So then I remembered, oh, I wanted to show you guys animations. So I put this little bar in there, so every time you clap it, it stops you from clapping it again for 3 seconds. And that's how this thing is staying alive. So this is like, so when you talk about like JavaScript manipulating native controls and doing it over an asynchronous bridge, and it's a highly optimized asynchronous bridge, it batches things together, does things pretty smart, but animations are things that are going boom, 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 boom. Like when you talk about like, animations often rely on like cycling this value from 0 to 100 and interpolating it, that's a hard word to say, into something else to maybe it fills a circle, maybe it changes a gradient, maybe it moves something across the screen. If you were to do all of that interactivity from JavaScript to native, boom, 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 like that's where stuff's gonna get out of control. Like there's no way you could maintain that performance. So that's why the animation libraries are actually really smart about sending like the whole thing, or sending these manageable chunks over to the native side, and actually relying on the native animation optimizations that can make things look so smooth in a native iOS app. So you can have the same smooth experience coding from JavaScript. You don't have to sacrifice there. So kind of showing this off real quick, the preeminent animation library is React Native Reanimated. And I was actually like, I dabble in animations. Like I'll go like 6 months or a year, and I'll be like, okay, I need another animation, and then I'll forget everything. I was just shocked how, like I was really tired. It was 1 a.m. last night, and I was like, I'm loving animating this thing. So the way it works here is you create this shared value. So this is like a special value that's optimized to do these like motion things, to go quickly from one thing to another. And then you kind of do a style wrapper where you say, hey, this is a style, it's gonna incorporate the shared value. So this style is going to be smart about applying itself in a way that it's okay if the values change. But basically, you gotta create this whole pipeline where everything knows to send the animation over optimized to the native side. And then finally, when it's time to animate, it's like really like this nice little composition API right here. So you see right here, this with sequence wraps 2 different animations, and I did very simple with timing. So I did a timing from 0 to 100, take 3 seconds, and then followed by a timing back to 0 with a duration of 1 millisecond. So that's where you get the whole like very smooth 1, 2, 3, boop, disappear. So like that's animation is as simple as that, and you would actually have to go out of your way to make it work poorly. So really dig the animation there. And that reminds me of my last little bit on this example here, which is, this is JavaScript. So if you've worked in web JavaScript, you're probably quite familiar with, all different libraries you use. Maybe you abstract your network operations with Axios. Maybe you use, someone name me a library they like in their web app.
jQuery, man.
jQuery. Well, that one might be a little bit weird.
Bootstrap JS.
That is DOM manipulation. So Lodash. The date one. What's Luxon? Is that the latest date one? There's a lot of date ones.
Moment.
What was that one?
Or Moment.
Moment. Yeah.
Anybody
I
use
think
that
the
stuff?
Moment people said to go to Luxon. Did they or no?
Yeah.
Okay. I actually met the Moment maintainers were at like CodeMash years ago, and I accidentally sat at their table, and I was like, I found out they did Moment. I was just like, oh my god, I'm not worthy. That was my first exposure to open source people, and I've been embarrassing myself ever since. So since you're in JavaScript, so JavaScript and React Native is very much like JavaScript in your web app. The only things you're not going to have access to, because it is not 100% the same thing. It used to be called JavaScript Core, now it's a custom core called Hermes, but basically it's like a headless JavaScript built into your app. So you can think of it almost like Node.js. Like Node.js is JavaScript running outside of the browser. So it can do things that browsers can't do, and in some cases it can't do things that you can do with JavaScript in a browser. So like, this means that like most of the JavaScript ecosystem is open to you as a React Native developer. Like if it involves like using HTML5, like for instance, that's something you're not gonna be able to use inside of this JavaScript core, this Hermes core. Or in the case of jQuery, it's doing DOM manipulation, so we're not gonna use that. Unless we're using it in a web view that's embedded inside of React Native, then you can use jQuery again if you'd like. But this means you can use, like, if there's like a good networking library, if there's a good, datetime library, all these different libraries, even like WebSockets, things like that you're using in JavaScript land, it's by and large fully available to you. So the one I wanted to highlight today that I just really enjoyed that I hadn't used before is TanStack Query. Has anyone used TanStack Query before? Woo! Awesome. So I am very much the person who's like, I want to hand construct all my requests. Like I would go as far as using Axios, and then I'd be like, I need to make my own like Mobix stores with like 65 different loading state variables. Like, was it loaded the first time? Did it load and have an error? Are you loading it because you pulled the little drag to spin thing down, or is it loading on its own? Is it a silent reload? Is it a loud reload? All these different things. And I felt like I had to have control. TanStack Query does this for you. I mean, what was I doing all my life? And this is being very obvious as I was working with somebody's API, and it became very obvious as I was working in an API that was performing extraordinarily slow for me. So you can use these hooks, query hooks. You give it a query key, which is kind of like a unique identifier that is used for caching, so it won't reload it every time. And you give it a function. You can have anything in this function. I'm thinking about rewriting a bunch of my apps where instead of having like Mobix state stores, that I just have like JavaScript classes that are like returning JSON, like from query function, and like that would be, I don't know, maybe it'll work. Maybe it's a bad idea. It seems possible though. In this case, I have like placeholder data, so I was grabbing stuff from another cache so I could quickly get the image in here. And then like what's great is like for free, I get like loading spinners. Well, I mean, the spinner itself isn't free, but the loading state is free. And then all I have to do, all I'm responsible for is getting a spinner on the screen. I get this caching, so if I go back and reload the screen again, I don't remember which one I loaded. Okay, painting, there we go. It comes back right away because it's not just gonna like clear it out and reload it. So it's got the centralized cache. So you can use all that stuff in React Native, but I just wanted to point that out because even if you're not doing React Native, that was just really fulfilling. So, that is most of the actual like live demo part. Let me see if I hit all my points here. As was talking about file-based routing, fully native controls, universal, JavaScript ecosystem, API. I did it all. Okay, good. So I guess while I have the demo kind of still fresh, are there any other questions that come to mind about that like code itself? And I will have a link so you guys can play with my demo on your own fast Wi-Fi at home. Oops, there we go.
I just want to comment on the genius that thought to put the parentheses in the file names in the folders. That's like, is that what you showed? The
Oh yeah. That's the one that means it's like a group without.
Yeah.
That's like the
like someone just
grouping.
threw the whole thing out the door and said, "Screw it, let's put parentheses in right in file." I've just never seen that before.
That might. I mean, we copied it, but then I think that's a Next.js thing, so we might have to blame that.
Is it?
I think so. Does it also support the weird thing that Next.js supports now is like modals with URLs?
Oh.
Yeah, it's messed up. People are taking this routing thing, file-based routing thing really far, where like even modals will have like their own route to get to, and you can control it with the router. At least that's my.
So I'm not sure we do the same thing, but this example does have a modal. Like I forgot to take the modal out of the default example. So that is technically a modal, and it is a different route, but I need to go look this up to see it. Because it looks like you just push a different route out there, but it could just be like a difference between like mobile modals are like, well, I guess they're always like a thing going on top of a thing, but like there's some differences there because it's still at the end of the day dealing with something emulating like Stack Navigator from iOS or something like that, like Storyboard or whatever. I'm gonna look that up though, I'm curious now. My perspective on some of this is like actually like all these like web concepts and mobile concepts are coming together, and I actually have like a background very much in mobile development and not very much in web development. Like I had like a brief detour as a full-time web developer using a framework that was like homegrown within this company based on like XSL transforms. So like I spent like 3 years like doing stuff that wasn't analogous to anything in the industry. And before that, I was like Windows mobile, WPF, desktop, and then after that, I was native iOS and React Native. So I have this like weird tunnel vision about like web stuff that's like normal to everybody.
Did you use a UI framework at all for this?
For the sample app? No, I use, so you can. So there's like Tamagui, there's React Native Elements. You can use any of those UI libraries. I actually just used, we have like in this example, like one of the things we demonstrate in the example is like theming. So like dark and light theming, but we do it with like a very basic kind of, here is a couple controls that are themed, and here's an access to some hooks. And I just extended, like I added, I think it already has text, view, I added flat list and my loading shade. And that was, other than that, it's just like a stock. And that's why it's a little bit Spartan. But I still like handcrafting my controls a lot. I'm still getting used to like whether I want to do a UI framework or not. But you can. Cool. So, oh yeah, go ahead.
So when you save, it's like say you save on there, will it automatically clear your cache? Like say you like change the API like on your back end, like will it clear your cache automatically, or how would that go about for?
You're talking about when you update the API route or update anything?
Yeah, like if it's like update anything really.
Yeah, so the only time it clears like the actual like JavaScript bundling cache out is if you do the -C on the npx expo start. So otherwise it's doing caching so it can reload quickly. The part where that typically, like the API routes, you probably wouldn't really ever need to clear the cache except that maybe if you're adding like a library itself, because it reloads or re-executes that JavaScript every time. So you're not gonna have like memory values in there or anything like that. In the case of the front end, it's doing this like, this is something I didn't even demonstrate and I should real quick. It defaults to fast reloading. So let me throw this modal up here real quick because I have that file open. And I'm going to change like this to modal 2. I wonder if I actually loaded. I might have not have reloaded it since I Let me do a full refresh. This is actually the limitation of fast reloading, is sometimes you can get yourself in a state where you have to refresh all the way. There we go. Now it should say modal 2. Okay. And now if I go modal 3, it should really, there, so you can barely like see it. So it does this thing called fast reloading, and in a few, like that will keep like everything in memory state. So depending on like say how you implement like a shared store or something like that, like a Mobix or a Redux, you could get into some situations where like that plays funny with your data store, in which case you can do like a full refresh. But it defaults to that, so you can like very quickly like edit your app and keep it on the same screen and see changes quickly. And if you need to, actually clearing the cache, like restarting the bundler and clearing the cache, typically like the situation for native development would be like if you're changing like your Babel transforms, I guess that would apply to web too. Like if you're adding any Babel code, that requires a cache clear. But normally you don't need it too much. Cool, go ahead.
How does Expo handle styling from going to like React Native to all the native?
Yeah. So that is part of the React Native web, kind of that secret transform that's happening where it's turning all of those views and the divs and stuff like that. So a lot of the styling like ports over pretty directly. Like you can consider like the styling for React Native is like CSS if you only had Flexbox. And so you'll see like a lot of these things are very familiar, but like for instance, I think you need like what display equals flex in order for that to work on web. So that React Native web library, it'll see that style and it'll add that display flex. So it'll do things like that. So you're dependent on that translation layer to do that right. That's been honed pretty well for several years now. And you can of course override it if you find you need like a very specific style. You can actually this is the way you would do it if you found like on web, I need a very specific thing on web. It is totally okay to add a web specific component here. Like actually if I change the file name here, which I won't because I'll break it, but I'll at least start to type it in. If I change this to .web.tsx, this will tell it to only serve this file for web. You can actually have like .android, .ios, you could have .mobile if you wanted that to serve for mobile, but not for web. And once you're inside there, you can just write straight HTML if you want. You don't need to write views anymore. I mean, you might want to because maybe you've created views that share styles, but you don't have to. The other thing that's happening, this is kind of early, but it's happening and it's going to really pick up this year. There's like Tailwind CSS support for native. It's called NativeWind, and they're working on making that better and better. So you can do a lot of stuff that's going to make your native code look like really way like, you just like, here's a bunch of CSS looking classes and it works. And that's like a whole, like, there's like bundler optimizations that go into that. Like that just doesn't just like happen in runtime. There's some fancy stuff there. Let me fix that file. Stop me if I'm like going too long. I don't know how much. I can keep going.
You got a little bit.
Okay, cool. So the one part I wanted to get back to, which you guys might have all forgotten because we actually spent like a lot of time in the demo, which is actually really good. I love talking about code. So going back to that Expo Go app, it is a treat. It is also a trick. So you know how I was talking about the reason you guys can run that on your phone is because it kind of has like this kitchen sink of native code in there. When you compile an app and you publish it to the store, the native code is fixed. Like you're not allowed to like change the native binary inside of your app file. Like Apple doesn't like that. If you could do it and they found out, you would not have a good day with them. So you're limited with the Expo Go app to what is already in that native code. So say like in my example, like I needed healthcare integration, or say I even just need like a different view that, I don't know, shows, maybe does like a pretty gradient that I can't do. And I can't think of a great example because you can do gradient with the stuff that's already in there. But you need something different. You can't do that with Expo Go. So the big question is like, how do you get this like really nice, like that was, I think that was a pretty nice development experience where all I had to do was run a server and like scan something and it was running in my phone. I didn't have to install anything. I didn't have to wait for anything to build. I didn't have to have Xcode. I forget where I put my bag, but actually, visual aid, I have a project I do at night on the side, and I don't like to like share my work computer with the like non-work computer because I'll just like go do work when I need to do the other work. So I'm also really cheap, so I bought this laptop for like $200 off of eBay. It's like a 7-year-old ThinkPad, and I put Linux on it, and I'm building an app, and I've spent like at least 100 hours in this thing, and I have not installed anything but a Node environment. So, and that's even though it can't use Expo Go. I can't run this app in Expo Go. So how do you do that? And we have a thing called, well, where do I start here? So the short answer is they're called development builds. So what this is we've made it possible to build your own personal version of Expo Go for your specific app. So you can stick any native code in there. You can write your own custom Swift and Kotlin, stick it in a folder, have it integrated in. You can download a library that does like that health kit in that one example. You can do whatever, and you can actually request from the EAS build service a development build. And all it is it's a build of your app, and instead of opening up in the app itself, it opens up in that little like web browser interface or app browser interface. By the way, you shake it to get back to the interface on the phone. It opens up this thing and lets you scan a URL for a development server and run your JavaScript. So like the whole barrier there is you have to get something that can run your JavaScript, that has the native code behind it in order to use that. So that's what we provided there. So you do have to, like in that case, you have to wait 10, 15 minutes for a build that first time that you need that. But you can be like pretty like efficient with it, load up your app with all your native specific stuff that you need, run a development build. You can share it with your team, so you can give, especially Android is very easy, it's just an APK. In the case of iOS, since they have all their signing rules on it, we have like a website where you can register different devices for your development team and then give them the build and everybody can use it. So you can still have the same experience and still like access the entire mobile ecosystem. Like not just the React Native ecosystem too, because it's increasingly easy with some of the tools in the Expo open source libraries to write your own native code. So like, maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of there, but there's a perception that like if I can give you experience that easy, there must be like some strings attached. And in this case, the string attached is that, okay, you have to like submit a build, but the string is not like you can't do this thing. We've thought really hard about how to make it possible that you can write cross-platform code, but you don't have to like think you're gonna get stuck at some point, that you're gonna have to leave that nice experience. Because that experience, I used that experience for years in my previous job where I had like a designer who would engage with the code like once every quarter or something like that. And the last thing I wanted to do was spend an hour on Zoom with him trying to debug his Xcode environment. I really just wanted to give him something and test it, let him edit, some styles and stuff like that, and go on with his day. And with this picture here, I've been posting this picture on here, and hopefully you showed up. Did it? Okay, good. I know you were going to show me. That I've been kind of not talking about yet, but this kind of demonstrates the philosophy behind both what you saw with Expo Go, what you would see if you use a development build, what you would see if you were using the whole experience, which is exploiting the difference between the layers of your React Native app. So you have JavaScript, that's stuff I saw inside my project. And that's where like your business logic is going to live. That's where day-to-day you're going to code. I was talking to one team today, they have 20 odd native developers on there. They use Expo and React Native, and they said that over 99% of their coding doesn't change that bottom layer, that native layer. And that part is where you're going to have like, okay, everything that gets in that binary, your splash screen, your icon, any native code that is operated by your JavaScript. So by exploiting the differences here, we're able to create an environment where you don't have to rebuild the native layer very often. You only rebuild it when, say you upgrade major versions, or when you add like that health kit library, or some major functionality that's dependent on the device. But when you're adding screens, when you're changing forms, when you're doing all these things that are a typical day-to-day part of app development, you can update JavaScript, which means you can run that Expo CLI, you can point it to your development build, you can have that instant startup experience, and you don't have to build. And like me, you could have a really cheap laptop with no native tooling on it and get really far with it. In fact, this laptop's overkill. And Linux is really efficient. Like, I paid for the 16 gig version and I got an extra hard drive upgrade. Like, I could have put this together for like $130, which is subtext is there, not that you have to go buy a new laptop, but like whatever hardware you have, it can work. You can run it, and it doesn't have to be a Mac to work with a Mac with an iOS app. It can be Linux in my case, it can be Windows. Years ago, I got it running on a Chromebook. So it's a little slow, it's a little messy because Chromebooks are Chromebooks, but it worked. Yep, that was really the slide I should have had up there. And that's the command. If you headed to get started in the Expo ecosystem, you would use this command, this EAS CLI. You would build a build. There is once you're using cloud services, so we try to isolate, okay, here's the Expo open source. That's usually the Expo commands, Expo-library. EAS stands for Expo Application Services. That's the services component. There is a generous free tier, so you can build up to 30 Android or 15 iOS builds a month free. So if you want to get started with development, you can get that development build out, try to think about your dependencies ahead of time so you don't have to use too many builds, and you can easily go a really long way without having to pay money, but also not having to install native tools. And then of course, if your app gets big, then you can go pay Expo money. And part of I'm really unraveling the onion here, but part of the magic why this all works is it's called pre-build. We kind of have a new brand name on it called CNG, Continuous Native Generation. And it's the whole idea that we have a template that generates your native code for you. And it's based off of, okay, here's a base template. This is what your basic iOS or Android native project looks like. And then we add your node dependency. So any node dependency that references iOS libraries, that gets automatically put in there. And then we have this app configuration. So I ignored, where did I put that file there? Okay, here we go. I ignored this file, but this is a kind of a configuration file that represents really common things that go into an app, like a name, an icon, splash screen. I didn't put bundle identifier yet, but different things that would be required when you build an app. And so there's a configuration sync that happens where we have this process, this pre-build process that copies these things over into those native projects. And then finally, we have this thing called config plugins, where if you've ever built a native app, you'll see these instructions that'll be oh, add this thing to the entitlements file on Xcode, paste this code into the appdelegate.m file. All these weird things that just sound they're the antithesis of automation. And they're very finicky, and they're things that are you have to do these because Apple and Google tell you to. And we've built a system where it'll actually automate those for you. One cool thing that we actually just put out is we call it Patch Project. I'm actually supposed to document it. So if you're looking for documentation, you'll only find it on Twitter right now, because I'm not done yet. But you could go run the pre-build command to generate those iOS and Android projects. You could go follow the instructions on somebody's old React Native library that say do all these manual steps. You could run Patch Project and then delete the iOS and Android folders, and it'll generate a config plugin for you that will do those steps for you. So basically patch package, but for native projects. So it's increasingly getting to the point where you don't have to, you don't have to think about native projects more than that moment in time. And then you can shuffle it away and forget about it and stick it under a process where it will reliably recreate itself only when you need it. It's almost like node modules, but for these messy native foldery things. I'll hit on this really quick just to kind of wrap it up. Level 99 React Native wizardry is over the year updates. Going back to this diagram here, so we talked all about oh, you can have a native app and you can live reload your local development environment. So it has a really fast development, local development experience. But what if you could do that same thing on production apps? So this is what EAS Update is it's again exploiting this variation, except in production, where you can have your app say, oh, look, when the app loads, look for something that says there's new JavaScript on the server. If there's new JavaScript on the server, download it, and then restart my app, and now my app is running on the new JavaScript. This sounds like something that shouldn't be allowed in the App Store rules, but it is. Even Apple's rules, they have an exception for interpreted code. JavaScript is interpreted code. You can download it from the internet and interpret it. So you are allowed, as long as you're not contravening the purpose of your app in the App Store, your App Store description, you can actually download new code on an already deployed app in the store and run it. And so you can use this for bug fixes and things like that. So that's another way, kind of thinking all the way through, this difference between native and JavaScript and how we can use that to do things like update our app in a couple minutes based on pushing a file to a server instead of submitting it to Apple and waiting between 12 hours and 2 weeks for it to update. And that's the command you use. It's in the EAS CLI. Does it scale? We think so. So, when folks talk about, opting in all these workflows, it's but if I build my app with the Expo CLI and I build it with EAS build and I use EAS update, what if I decide these things are no longer right for my company? What if my company has a security concern about EAS update? What if they get to a scale where they think they would build better on their own infrastructure? What if they don't want to use pre-build, they want to go back to working on native projects on their own? And this slide is from a presentation I did earlier about kind of dispelling this whole React Native versus Expo thing, and really talking about how it's kind of one continuous ecosystem with options. And this is a lot to take in, but basically saying here hey, you could use development builds or not use development builds, and you could still use EAS build, or you could still just build it locally. And say you've really got invested in EAS update, and you're oh, we can't use EAS update anymore. You can actually, it's an open protocol, and you could run it on your own hardware. I'm not going to say that's easy. There's a lot of engineering that goes in that, but we made an open protocol for a reason because we didn't want people to feel you're stuck in this particular workflow. So there's really kind of this React Native choose your own adventure. There's this easy glide path, and there's these different branch points you can kind of go off on your own as your team thinks that's necessary. A long time ago it was called eject. We don't call it eject anymore. There's no ejecting. You're always in the workflow. You're just in different parts. I'll skip past that. But basically, kind of what I was going into here was I think a cool thing about working in React Native and with these tools is actually how complementary my history in mobile development has been. So my previous job, I was working on a React Native app. It was this app called Nudge for coaches. And it was a healthcare engagement app, and it was built very much in that streamlined workflow where I never had native tooling, that kind of thing. And then eventually it branched out into I needed some native tooling because I had to have HealthKit integration. That's why I keep saying HealthKit integration anymore, and that's the only thing I can think of because I dealt with that so much. And before that, I was actually doing a fully native app. The one on the left was fully native. It was in Objective-C and Swift. The one on the right, wait, did I get my directions right? Maybe that's right. The prettier one is the iOS native one. The less pretty Android one was done in Cordova or PhoneGap, so it was HTML web views. And then if you go back before, of course, I was doing Windows Mobile, and if you went back before that, I was making a Dragon Warrior clone on my graphing calculator. And maybe less to these ones, but especially working in JavaScript on a native app and working in native code, these things have all come together. There's kind of no, regardless of platform you choose, these knowledge go together. You could be a native iOS developer and appreciate the value of writing across platform JavaScript. And I kind of feel everybody who develops at some point, you end up being kind of a polyglot. You learn I can't think of a single programming job I've done that's touched less than a half dozen languages. So regardless of whether you consider yourself a JavaScript developer or you're like, I really want to do like straight native mobile because I really want some certain powerful feature, like I think these are all like things that could end up in your decision point, and your experience would be valuable in all of those. Like sometimes I'm thinking, I say to myself, hey, when I was hiring for a React Native team, you know, I'd really want to have at least one person on there who like did like a ton of Android or iOS native development, because I'm sure they could write JavaScript if they're competent, remotely competent, and they would also offer this really neat perspective. But at the same time, I would really want like a hardcore web person who maybe had no native exposure, because they could actually show me how to do like CSS styling right and not do all these weird things that I do because I'm more of a native developer. So no matter how you engage with mobile, which kind of brings it all the way back, like this is like a pretty cool thing to know about, and there's like a lot of value in the different perspectives and the different tools, and you can engage with them in lots of different ways. It's all good knowledge. And Expo, kind of the mission is, you know, part of that, besides making it as easy, mobile development as easy as web development, is also to like make sure where you need that native specific knowledge, you only have to do it in that one little spot, and you don't have to deal with this big giant thing you don't want to care about. So anyway, that's like the talk. I have that QR code there if you want to download that app and play with it. That's got whatever, you know, the materials on here. You can also, if you have questions about Expo, probably the best place, I mean, there's Twitter, which is, you know, Twitter or X or whatever, but chat.expo.dev is our Discord community where we're really trying to ramp up the Discord community and answer lots of questions and have lots of conversations. And yeah, thank you very much.
Some other questions, maybe?
I have one, or maybe a couple, but I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned that Expo doesn't have like an eject function anymore, which I think is kind of funny because Create Expo app seems to be derived from Create React app, which really caught on because it had that eject functionality. Because people were like, what if I want to edit my Webpack that I never actually need to edit? And now they have the eject thing, but. There's been multiple times for people where I have talked to people, once in Flutter and once in React Native, where they went in thinking that they were going to do a all-in-one, like they were going to do iOS, Android, and web all-in-one. And for some reason, they ended up just doing the web part. And so they ended up with the worst like web framework, basically. Like, Expo for just web is kind of not amazing. Like you don't have full access to like, you can't just write HTML and all those kind of things. Without an eject function, does Expo have an answer to that? Like, what if you need to split out into 3 or maybe just split your web app out? Is there an answer to that within the Expo?
So like eject for web, basically. Good. I mean, so when I say, like, going back to the native side, when I say there's no eject, like, it's a little misleading because you could run npx expo pre-build and that would function like eject would, because it would generate your native files and it would be functionally pretty similar to like an app created with the React Native community CLI. In the case of web, like it's kind of different, but it's kind of the same, where you can generate those files that it hides away from you on the fly. I'm trying to remember the command. It's npx expo customize web customize. If you do the help, you know, -- help, you'll probably find it. But what that does is it exposes like, well, back when you did Webpack, it would expose the Webpack config, and it would expose like Babel config. So it would expose these things that probably the best path once you expose those things would be to copy it over to like, say, like a stock React project or a Vite or something like that. If you're already an Expo router, especially, that gets a little bit more complicated because Expo router is tightly coupled with, I wouldn't want to say tightly coupled, but it's like the Metro bundler is the magic that makes that file-based routing work. But that said, because the structure is, or the syntax is so similar to Next.js, it's inspired by Next.js, like your kind of eject out of a Expo router app would probably be to copy it to a Next.js template. The one thing that you might run into, obviously, besides like, okay, you just made a bunch of React Native code. now you could import React Native Web into a Next.js project in theory, pretty much actually. And what it would do is it would actually make those translations over. So that might not be so bad in of itself. You might encounter some differences because you're not going to be using Metro Bundler in an Next.js. And that was actually one of the things that made the web story, when you're doing like all three platforms together come together, is once we switched over to compiling your web app in Metro Bundler. Just a few versions ago, the mainstream way was to compile web apps to Webpack, while Metro Bundler was the native. So what you would see is if you hit that W button, it would start a whole new bundler. And when you have a different bundler, occasionally you have different ways of bundling things, and occasionally the thing that worked on mobile turned into a white screen on web. So you might have like a little bit more to look at, like if you were to copy over, say, an SDK50 Expo router project to like a fresh Next.js project, just because of the bundling differences.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. That's definitely, it's a weird story, and it's weird I've heard it twice.
It is pretty, like, actually, I did hear from somebody who started only on web in React Native, in like their logic kind of being like, I know I was going to go to mobile and this is going to be like a much nicer migration path. Now they didn't leave that, so that was the differences. But I would be curious on some of the details of the folks who did eject. That would be, I mean, I guess I understand if you needed to really kind of blow this up into like a full-blown web app, like especially a few SDK versions ago, and you had no aspirations on the web version. I'm thinking of what's the name of Fernando Roja? He does a framework that was kind of like, it was a starter that had like Next.js and React Native involved. Solito? Does that sound familiar? I feel like that could have been a logical path to like the kind of even point, like midway point, where it focused on putting components in a single place, and then letting you kind of frame them out on Next.js side, and then frame them out on the React Native side, while like trying to share code as much as you could. And that might have been like the hedge your bets way to do that sort of thing.
Makes sense to me.
Oh, go ahead.
When you Expo install something, does it just set it to a specific version of like all the packages, or how do you guys figure that out?
Oh yeah. So the npx expo install command is kind of like our proxy to your whatever package manager you're using. So what it does is it checks if you're using a package inside of this list of modules where we specified like a safe version range. And so it's kind of, its purpose has changed. Like, it was much more important when more people used Expo Go for like their mainstream like end-to-end app testing, which we're kind of telling folks not to do anymore. We're kind of saying like, hey, if you're gonna build an app for more than 15 minutes with this, you really should go over to development build. So it was really important that your package versions matched what was compatible with Expo Go, because those can't change on that side. It still is important today because it's going to specify, like, for instance, this patch version of the Expo SDK works well with this patch version of like Expo updates. So when you're using like especially like Expo updates is probably the one where you iterate the most on that. It's like pretty important to stick to that version. But you can actually safely, with the development build, deviate from those when you know it's like okay, because ultimately at the end of the day, your native code is going to get compiled. So can be a variety of. I'm rambling a little bit there because the purpose has changed. It's almost not the same thing anymore. But long story short, when it's running that install, it's checking that list. It's going to install the known compatible version if it finds a package in that list. If it doesn't, it's just going to send it to your bundler or to your package manager. So if it detects a yarn lock, it's going to send it to yarn. If it detects a bun lock, it's going to send it to bun, and it's just going to install whatever the latest is if it doesn't detect a preferred version.
Thank you.
No problem.
Last ones? Final call? All right, cool. Thank you very
Cool.
much.
Thank you so much. Good having you.
Thank you so much, Keith, for coming down from Cleveland. I really appreciate it. This has been awesome. I think this is our first time getting like an actual like developer evangelist person to Code Youngstown. So thank you for being our first. So typically we stick around for a little bit. Nick and I will be here for probably around an hour, hanging out, social hour. There's still plenty of pizza. There's some drinks left if you want something over there. tip your bartender. Shout out to Westside Bowl for hosting us. Thank you so much. We get this whole space. It's super appreciated. And again, Code Youngstown is mostly run by Nick and I, but we would be more than happy to help. The things that you could do to help out is A, spread the word, share our LinkedIn with people. That seems to be getting a lot of traction. B, if you have a thing you want to talk about, please let us know. We'd love to host you and promote that. And finding speakers is a pain, and if someone just steps forward, it's way easier. If you have a venue in mind, please let us know. We'd love to kind of travel around and check out the places in Youngstown that are willing to put up with us. So please keep us in mind for that. Then also, if there's an event or something you want to put on, I know people have talked about like having more specialist groups. Code Youngstown is a very generalist group, maybe JavaScript or PHP or whatever you're super passionate about. If you want to like put together something smaller or something more specific, please let us know. We're more than happy to help you out with that. That being said, everyone have a good night. Thank you all for coming out.